novice like myself. So my background's in public policy, and a lot of the stuff that I know is self-taught and using resources that I think pretty much any of us could use. So there's a website called geocalibration.org, and it was developed by IARPA, or it was developed by under a grant from IARPA. And what it does is it assists people in identifying, doing geocalibration, which I would say is like a sub-technique of geolocation, to find the specific coordinates, focal length, and heading of a picture. And so I wanted to give you guys a really good test of how even a free tool like this, and again in a novice's hands like mine, what can be done. So this is a picture from my hometown that is over 100 years old. It was put on a social media website on Facebook. And I was wondering myself, and of course I'm a nerd, so this is what I did over Christmas break when I was visiting my family, I was wondering if I could use geocalibration to take a picture where almost none of the landmarks are currently present, identify not only the focal length, the direction, but the latitude and longitudinal coordinates of a camera that was, I guess, a nitrate film camera from over 100 years ago. And so after some playing around with it, I went back and I identified the correct site, focal length, and using, like a 10-year-old camera my father had, I was able to identify the exact location of where the picture was taken, or nearly exact. It's pretty close. You can see there's an embankment that's now gone on the left side. There's a bank there. And checking with a local historian, I determined that that is in fact the correct path and the correct overlay. So the third skill that I want to talk about is interpreting imagery. Again, this is something I did not learn in school, going through my PhD program, but is eminently doable. There's a large amount of commercial imagery that's currently available, but just because it's out there doesn't mean that it can be interpreted properly. So it's increasingly possible for civilians to go on even just using Google Earth and learn a little bit more. But the tricky thing, like I said, is understanding the imagery. So any guess as to what those two vessels are kind of out there in the frame of the picture? I know that I would never have guessed this. Those are actually dredgers. This is a still that I took from imagery over Subai Reef in the South China Sea. And this is, for those of you that have heard of it, this is the example of the Chinese building artificial islands out in the ocean using dredgers. So you might ask yourself, okay, so how would you go about learning some of these things? So you could tell the difference between a fishing boat and a dredger. What I found incredible is I've developed these courses through the support of the CAE grant, is that there is a ton of material out there to help me get started. Of course, I have contacts and people that I know at NGA and other places that have helped me with unclassified assistance. But it's amazing in terms of just commercial imagery, the resources that are out there that are available. So the Harvard Humanitarian Institute, or I'm sorry, Initiative, they have several PDFs publicly available that help you understand what does wind damage look like after a major storm has gone through, looking at the commercial imagery. They have another one, how do you differentiate between a hut that has been burned down versus one that has simply fallen down due to disrepair and old age. And even, just to give you an even more finite example, that middle one of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the example that I found fascinating, is that you can in this particular manual, they help you understand how you could identify the trajectory of different artillery and mortar shells. And they have training data in there as well for your classes. So, taking it back home to my bottom line, when it comes to these skills that I've shown you today, the point that I want to make is that, if we really want to fully leverage these open sources, so like the social media course, the geospatial intelligence course that we offer here at UTEP, what I've really found is that there's a lot of resources out there for us, but I have to say this has meant that I've had to go a little bit outside the box and think a little bit differently, ask questions of people that perhaps I wouldn't have ordinarily. And I would say, and again, this would be during the Q&A if anybody wants to talk about it, I picked 3. There's many, many more. from using advanced searching. Learning and understanding the differences between social media platforms and the different search connectors that you use on them, as well as the other content about geospatial and social media intelligence, which is not skill-based per se. So I thank you for your time, and I will now give the podium to Dr. Duke.
Hello, my name is Misty Duke, and I also would like to thank the CAE for allowing us to come up and talk about some of the exciting things we're doing in our classrooms here at UTEP. So I'm going to talk about a couple of courses that I developed for the program. As was mentioned in my introduction, I'm a psychologist. My PhD is in legal psychology, which is studying the psychological aspect of legal processes. And so I created these two courses which were very directly applicable to intelligence and national security studies, but brings in a behavioral sciences perspective. So I'll talk about these. These are the two courses that I'm going to discuss today. So I want to emphasize that I kind of have a different approach than what Steve is talking about. Steve was really emphasizing the development of some of these really cutting-edge skills, which is great. But especially in these two areas that my courses are about, cognitive bias, which pertains to intelligence analysis, and intelligence interviewing and interrogation, these are things that that people who go into work in the IC or in law enforcement get training on these things in their respective agencies. So I want to emphasize that what my goal in these courses is not to train them, is not to teach them skills. These are not skills-based courses. That these are intended to provide them with knowledge, with an understanding of some of these kind of a more holistic understanding of some of the what we know from behavioral science research and theory about these areas that can then inform their practice. So when they go to receive training, for example, in interrogation, that they understand when they're learning about a specific interrogation method, why are we being taught this? Why is this important that we do it this way? So first let me talk about the cognitive bias course. So in the words of Daniel Kahneman, pioneer in research on cognitive biases, the theme of this course is to improve the ability to identify and understand errors of judgment and choice in others and eventually in ourselves by providing a richer and more precise language to discuss them. In at least some cases, an accurate diagnosis may suggest an intervention to limit the damage that bad judgments and choices often cause. So in this course, we discuss three broad categories of thinking errors. First, we talk about errors in evaluating evidence. These are some of the errors we review in the class, but for the purposes of our discussion, I'm going to focus on hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is the belief that an event is more predictable after it becomes known than it was, of course, before it became known. It's an inability to recapture the feeling of uncertainty after an event has occurred. It's what Baruch Fischoff, who's a pioneer in hindsight bias research, called creeping determinism. So I want to emphasize that in this course, I try to answer these three questions about each of these thinking errors. How do these errors occur? So for this part, we kind of use some experiential kinds of activities. Why do they occur? And this is where I bring in some of the behavioral science theory. And then what can we do to ameliorate it? Of course, in many cases, it cannot be entirely ameliorated. So I really think that it's important, because these are universal human phenomena, these thinking errors, that students be allowed to experience it, and so that they can really understand that, yes, I do too make these mistakes. Some of us like to think that we don't make these we all make these, these mistakes. Like the ball and the bat example the other day, I've got probably nobody said 5 cents for the ball, but none of my students, when I use that say it. So we try to kind of give them that experience, and a lot of times I do that through having them perform tasks that actual research participants in actual studies have done, so they can kind of see how it works. So here's an example from one of Fishoff's early studies on hindsight bias. We have one group, all groups read a story, a paragraph. It's about the British campaign against the Nepalese Gurkhas in 1814. This is an obscure enough event that most people don't know what it is or what the outcome was. And so we have 5 groups. One group is not told the outcome of the event, but they have to choose, all groups have to choose between these 4 outcomes. One group is not told the outcome, the other groups are told an outcome, but they are told to discount that outcome when they decide, based on the information in the paragraph, what the outcome of the conflict was. Of course, as we might have guessed, students are unable to discount their knowledge of the outcome, and they are going to choose the outcome, like in this case it would be Gurkhas, British, so on and so forth. They're going to be more likely to choose the outcome that's consistent with what was given them. So we talk about why does hindsight bias occur, and it occurs on these 3 levels. One has to do with memory distortion, that whether you said it would happen, you didn't really say it would happen, but you remember saying it would happen. The inevitability, it had to happen. You know, we believed that there was no other possible outcome, and foreseeability. I knew it would happen. Foreseeability, we talked about yesterday in the discussion on cognitive bias, he discussed motivational aspects of bias, and this is certainly motivation related, that we like to believe that we can foresee events. And then we talk about the issue of sense making, that cognitive bias many times occurs because we do not have a clear understanding of causal reasoning. We have a difficult time understanding that there are many possible causes for any one effect, and there are often many possible effects from one cause. And so one of the things we talk about, what do we do about it, is to consider and explain how outcomes that did not occur could have occurred, and also consider different antecedents that could produce the same and different outcome. We talk about knowledge updating and sense making, discussing these many-to-many causal relationships, and also try to stimulate counterfactual reasoning. So we spend a lot of time talking about causal inferences in the course as well. Another thing we do related to knowledge updating is talk about Bayesian reasoning, how to incorporate new information into our belief systems. And so Bayesian reasoning provides algorithms for updating our prior beliefs with new information. We also do a pretty extended simulation in which we apply Bayesian reasoning to a specific scenario. It was if you've ever read The Art of Intelligence, Ruben Arcos was one of the authors. There's a really nice simulation in there on Bayesian reasoning applied to a national security scenario. We also talk about drawing inferences in the course, and we consider several errors in drawing inferences. The one I'll talk about right now is, again, these invalid causal inferences. We talk about how we conclude that A causes B when it isn't so, and one reason is that we conclude that a correlation between two phenomena is indicative of causation. If I were to tell you that shoe size is relating to reading achievement, you might try to explain this relationship by finding reasons why larger-footed people read better. But this, of course, we know that this is a spurious relationship because there's a third variable, age, which causes variation in both shoe size and reading achievement. We talk about why do we make that invalid causal reasoning, causal inferences, and there are several possible reasons. And then what do we do about it? One of the things that we talk about is the importance of scientific reasoning in class. And so we play Mastermind. Has anyone played Mastermind in here? Anybody remember that game from your childhood? This involves the Mastermind. Of course, you're given a code. I have a code, and they have to break the code, and they have to make guesses, informed guesses about what the code might be. If they get the color in the correct position, they get a black dot. If they get the right color in the wrong position, they get a white dot. This is probably, I talk too much with my hands. I need to be careful. This is probably familiar to you from childhood. But one of the things we talk about is the importance of systematic variation in our guesses, that we don't just do this by trial and error. It'll take all day. We also talk about errors in attributing and predicting behavior. There are several, of course, errors that we talk about here. But I'm going to focus on the actor-observer bias, which we attribute the actions of others to their personality and the actions of ourselves to the situation. So one of the things we do is students make a number of judgments of themselves and a famous person. I pick Donald Trump because everybody knows him and people either love him or hate him. But what they tend to do is choose "it depends" for themselves, but they choose, make a judgment about what another person would do. And of course, we know this is because we know ourselves. We believe that our own actions are determined by the situation, whereas others are determined by their disposition. And so why do we do that? Well, we tend to pay more attention to the situation when evaluating our own behavior, and we don't whenever we evaluate the behavior of others. What do we do about these attribution errors just in general when we're trying to make attributions for other people's behavior? One of the things we talk about is game theory. There we go. I introduced in very general terms game theory, which considers the behavior of rational actors in interacting in specific situations. So we play a simplified version of the prisoner's dilemma. The students are given two cards, one red and one black, and told that they're playing with an unknown classmate. They're told that they may play one card. If they play the red, they get $2. But if they play the black, the other classmate gets $3. So game theory considers the action profiles of each player. So if only one player defects, they play red, the other player suffers. The equilibrium of this game is that both players defect. Game theory can provide a framework for considering the actions of other state or non-state actors, and we talk about how this applies to intelligence analysis. So one of the evaluations in this course is students must write a paper. They have to read Kristen Wheaton's book Straw Man. Is anybody familiar with that? It's like a choose your own adventure type game where you go through and you have to you're in a national security related scenario, and you have to make decisions and try to avoid cognitive bias when you make your decisions. And so they have to read this book, and then they have to write a paper about their progress through the book and identify how some of the mistakes they may have made were related to some of the things we talk about in class. So let me talk a little bit about intelligence interviewing and interrogation. So the goal of this class is to develop in students a holistic understanding of instrumental social interaction. So what I mean by that is that the interaction is intended, it's not just, it's not done for the sake of having, there's no intrinsic value gained from this interaction. It's done to achieve a goal, which is to obtain accurate and actionable intelligence from a source of information. And of course, I'm passionate about this course because this is really related to my area of research. I've studied rapport building and intelligence interrogations, and I've studied specific intelligence interrogation methods, such as some of them from the Army Field Manual. And so what I want them is to have this holistic understanding based on behavioral science research and theory, and be able to consider how to apply their knowledge to specific sources. One of the things I reiterate in this class is that interrogation methods are not one size fits all, that they must be able to make informed decisions about how to apply what they've learned to a specific case. And that it's very important to know the source that they're going to interrogate. So these are most of the topics that we review in class. We talk about, for example, social influence, the importance of social influence in overcoming resistance. How do we use psychological processes of persuasion to overcome resistance? How do we, police interrogations and false confessions. We talk about elicitation and how that's different from typical interviews. And interpreters, what impact do interpreters of culture play in interrogation? How do we tell when the source is lying to us? And so, but really one of the most important thing, the thing that really underlies all of our discussions is rapport. We really focus on rapport and continue to come back to this. The reason why we focus on it is it's really in most theories that we have developed on intelligence interrogation, rapport is really central to all interrogation methods that are used. And it's really, we consider it necessary but not sufficient for to produce a cooperation. And so what we talk about in the class is that the goal is to gain cooperation. We want to get the source to want to tell us what they know, rather than to gain compliance. And so that rapport is really central to that. And of course we talk about there's no one way to build rapport with everybody. There's no one way to do it, although it's often simplified in training curricula. And so we talk, one of the things we do is I have the students divide up into groups, and I give them specific sources and characteristics of specific sources, and they must identify how would they build rapport with this person. For example, how would we build rapport with Anas al-Libi, mastermind behind the Kenya and Tanzania embassy bombings? So they look at his characteristics, and one of the things I teach them to look for are there interests and identities of this person that really cut across ideological, ethnic, and cultural lines. Can we find a way to relate with this person? One of the things we talk about also is that it's difficult to develop rapport with someone who's responsible for the murder of hundreds of people. And so how do we do that? That we must focus on the goal of the interrogation, which is not to exact retribution, but to collect information to support intelligence requirements. We talked about, of course, about what works in intelligence interrogation. We talk about what does the research say about interrogation methods? Where is research lacking? And what does behavioral science, where it is lacking, what does behavioral science theory say about this interrogation method? Why does it work? We also spend some time talking about the practice of successful interrogators. What did they do right? How does this relate to the topics that we've discussed in class? What could they have done better? So we have Ali Soufan. We talked quite a bit about him. He was an FBI interrogator. He interrogated the bodyguard of Osama bin Laden, Abu Hundal. It was considered one of the most successful interrogations of Al-Qaeda members that there has been. Hans Scharf was an interrogator during World War II. He worked for the Nazis, interrogating RAF and United States Air Force pilots. And he used rapport building methods. He used a technique that's actually been tried to be replicated and has been studied several times and found to be pretty effective in obtaining information. He befriended the pilots and built rapport with them, and was able to get them to tell him things that they didn't even know that they had told him information that he didn't know. There's Oren DeForest down here. He was an interrogator during the Vietnam War. If any of you have read his book, Slow Burn, he talks about that. He worked for the CIA during the Vietnam War. Again, developed a very successful interrogation center and was able to obtain a boatload of information. He was very successful at being able to maintain a database of information before we had without computers, let's put it that way. And then Stephen Gowden, he was also an FBI interrogator. He interrogated, we read a case study of his interrogation of Muhammad al-Awlaki after the Nairobi embassy bombing, in which, again, he used, so all of these guys used rapport building, but also without even knowing that they were doing it, using some pretty sophisticated persuasion, concepts of persuasion from behavioral science that were able to influence their sources, who were highly resistant, to want to provide information to them. So that's all I've got.
Do we have any questions? See one right here in the middle.
Yeah, my question is to Stephen. Yeah, I'm Akhtar from Texas A&M and chair of the computing and cybersecurity. Just fascinating looking at your work that you're doing. I would strongly encourage you to work with computer science students who are looking for projects. I teach a software engineering class in which we do work with these kind of things and try to get algorithms to fool the algorithms, because now we have so many face recognition algorithms that are out there. What is it? How much do you have to distort a face to just make sure that it doesn't get recognized? It still looks like a person, but it cannot be recognized. Stuff like that. I mean, how do you automate these kind of things? And so, with all these tools which are there, geo-mapping and things, how do you work with a map and write code behind it to just do the little thing that would work, help with the intelligent community or what have you? So the projects that you're doing is just fascinating, and I think we look for projects like this, and so if you have something and they need some code help, talk to us or talk to computer science folks, I think.
Oh, thank you very much for your comment. One of the things I find is I go down this glorious rabbit hole, is the affinity to work with computer scientists and work with STEM folks. Did a fantastic collaboration of my own in a research article with a computer scientist here at UTEP, and we would help each other, and that he was almost like, the way I kind of called it, like he was like my Hollywood consultant. Like he made sure that my co-author and I weren't saying anything factually incorrect about, we were talking about big data and data science in the article that we wrote. But I would say too, that absolutely, I know that our future plans are eventually to develop a data science concentration in our own program, with the goal of improving data science literacy amongst non-STEM students, like the ones that, the majority of which are in our program. So, but, one thing too is if anybody would want to reach out, I put links on all the slides, so I can send you the slides if you have interest in following up with any resources. Thank you.
Yeah, my question for Dr. Coulthard is, what background do students need before they come into your course?
That's a great question. So, let me put it this way. Last year when I taught the Geospatial Intelligence course, there was a much stronger GIS component to it. And I'd be lying to you if I didn't tell you that it was challenging at times because of that. But what I found is that with enough patience and enough time, a student can come in with, the students came in with no GIS experience. And by the end of the term, the undergraduates were able to load data, make a map, print it out, and do basic analyses, very, very basic spatial analyses. So this content can be taught to a non-STEM student with minimal background in my experience.
So this is mostly a comment for you. Keep it up. Get them to do really crazy kinds of things. In my class, I had a student who was really into image recognition. And he lived outside of San Antonio in the sticks. And his next door neighbor was a rancher. And the critical question for that rancher every day was, yesterday I had 100 cows. How many cows do I have today? And he took his drone and he flew it up over the ranch and videoed the entire ranch and then wrote a deep learning model to basically count cows. And it worked quite well. So those kind of really crazy, wacky projects sometimes are really insightful in terms of learning.
And if I could just respond and say, one of the things I've noticed is, so the GIS course that the Geospatial Intelligence course that has components of GIS in it, I have students in there that are from other units. So for example, I had a geology student in my course last year, and you want to talk about taking an idea and running with it. She did a project as a part of her dissertation that she integrated into my class where they were using high-end drones to search the desert out here in El Paso to identify missing people's bodies. And she came to me with that idea and we talked about it and the considerations related to IRB and so on and what she could talk about, what she couldn't. And it was just impressive to me that if you can, again, the point I wanted to make at the beginning is if you give students the tools, you have the passion, you're willing to think outside the box, you can really do some things that can catch some attention.
This is for Dr. Duke. Knowing that you started with the training versus education in the beginning, I'll ask this anyway. Any way on the interrogation techniques that you've had any kind of role playing or sort of hands-on kind? I mean, not hands-on with a terrorist, but anything that you did other than sort of present the information?
Sure. Yeah. One of the things we talk about is the cognitive interview, which is it's pretty widely taught, I think, these days in law enforcement. I know they teach it at FLETC now. So I have them get together and they have to, one person has to identify something that happened to them like over 6 months ago, and then the other person has to use the cognitive interview in order to get as much detail as possible. Another example is we talk about we talk a lot about lie detection, and we talk about their ways that have been studied to elicit cues to deception. And so one thing they do is one person has to go plan to commit a mock crime. So they have to go they have to walk around the building and go to different rooms and plan out how they're going to commit this crime. And another group has to also walk around the room, but they plan a non-criminal act. And so then they get back together and they go sit with their interrogator who uses this particular technique. It's called unanticipated questions. And they try to get information, and then they have to make a decision about, were they telling the truth or not? And we see, did this technique work better than when they didn't use the technique? So it's those sorts of things. I do try to have some sort of interactive component during each class period. I think I have one of my students, Liz. Is Liz here? Did she walk out of the room, Liz Olivas? She was in my class too, so if anyone wants to to ask her what her experience was.
This question is for Dr. Duke regarding the interrogations class. Is there a section that you do in that class where you teach some of the students how to overcome cognitive biases and ethnocentrism, that may arise? You may not see this if you're interrogating prisoners who come from the same communities, but say that you're interrogating somebody who was taken from a different community halfway around the world with a completely different culture. Is there some way that you teach the students to overcome that in order to again build the rapport or get a better interrogation to try and get that information?
We have a whole section, we have a whole topic where we talk about interpreters, the use of interpreters, and also the consideration of culture. I will say that the impact of culture on the interview success has been relatively understudied. However, I think that you can draw some conclusions about information across cultural studies and other domains. But one of the things I think that people really tend to want some very specific guidelines for how to, if they're from this culture, what do I do? And if they're from this culture, what do I do? And so I think people are different. People are people. So if you're talking about someone from this culture, I mean, imagine everybody in this country, how very different we are from one another. I always say individual differences are greater than group differences. So one of the things we talk about is the importance of asking questions, determining identities. How do I find out who you are, who you think you are? And that's going to be more telling to me than trying to work from some little tool book where you have everything. So that being said, how can I learn from you about what is respectful behavior and what is not, So I think that's really our best bet. So we talk a lot about that, but we talk about how cultural similarities certainly can be important, but taking an interest in one's culture and expecting, projecting respect for that culture is also important. Oh, there's Liz. If anybody has questions about a student experience in my course, she took it a couple, sort of put you on the spot there.
More questions?
Thank you all so much. We have our presentations. So during this next hour, we are altering the program ever so slightly because we want everyone to have an opportunity to be engaged. If we can have our panelists, those who are our program managers, come up, you know who you are. We're going to go ahead and introduce them. But we are going to shorten this particular portion of the program ever so slightly. We're going to do this one in 30 minutes. That way we will allot this second half of this hour for all of you, the principal investigators, to have an opportunity to engage with all of our senior advisory board members. That way you can ask them some questions, get some answers to some questions that you all have had throughout the week or the year.
So earlier today, I reminded everyone to please complete your evaluations. If you are leaving early, please complete your evaluations and leave them with the program management team or out at the front. So this helps us to ensure that we are making improvements to the program in the future. So we appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
And so before we start, just give us maybe 3 minutes. Kim shares a project that she had dreamt about last year and put in motion. And I know that earlier this morning we had talked about how is it that the PIs can collaborate, so on and so forth. And I just wanted to give her the opportunity to show what she has put together very succinctly so that you can see what happens when you give individuals the opportunity to excel. So she's bringing it up, and do we have a microphone over there? Thank you.
So while she's bringing that up, what I'm going to do is just introduce the panel really quickly. That way, as soon as we finish this presentation, we can dovetail directly into this panel discussion. So this particular panel discussion is going to be our ICCAE program managers. Last year, we really discussed how the program managers and coordinators play an integral role in managing the grants at your respective institutions. So we want to give them the opportunity to engage with you all to talk about some best practices, some challenges, how they overcome those challenges. So with that, the panelists that we have are Ms. Leslie Van Holten from Kansas on the far left. We also have Ms. Patty Sapero, seated right next to her. We have Mr. Hector Gadavi from Florida International University, and we have Ms. Carmen Medina from UTEP, who's been doing an excellent job as far as getting all of this pulled together for us this week.
Thank you. So I've been working the past year on creating a social media website, which I've already kind of discussed. This is the main page when you pull it up. I purposely use Scholars Portal for the name so it's not associated with the IC. So this is the main page. There are kind of 2 functions that I think will be of a lot of use for our scholars. If you'll click on the forums. So this is the forums page, and on here we have a couple different forums which we can create more, and admin will have to create more. But this is where students can post their research and ask questions about the ICCAE or the intelligence community in general. I like this because I wanted to share my research with a lot of other scholars that I've worked on over the 4 years that I've been in college. So I think this is a great way to kind of get that out there. Additionally, there's also a tab for job postings, because some of us hear about other job postings that across the country we may not hear about. So I think that's important. The other tab is groups. And this is where we can create groups. Groups can be created by anyone. It doesn't have to be an admin. So you can log on and create your own group, whether it's cyber. Brian Simpkins created the International Security Group. So you can connect with people in a group environment. And then, so a couple things on this. It is HTTPS, so it does have a security certificate. And all the scholars can use their, like a made-up username, which honestly is the hardest part about this website, is creating a username. I would recommend that all the scholars use their school email so that an admin can go in and review who's on there to make sure that there's no unauthorized users. But it will be up to the PIs at each school to send out the link that I will pass along to Brian here shortly. That link will allow students to create an account Otherwise, you can't just find this page and create an account yourself. So it is kind of secure in that way. And then it's username and password. I think it might ask for your birthday, but you don't have to put it in. It's not required. So there's not much of a PII concern. I made sure to check all those boxes when I was creating this. Yeah, so I meant to mention this. This page is only available to admins, so this is where we can see the email addresses, but no other member can view the email addresses of any other member. So, any questions? Yeah, really quickly, so right now we're on a trial version of this. Our hope is to, if we receive funding again, then use that funding to pay for this, not only for the startup costs, but also to continue to develop this and grow it out further.
Thank you so much. So as I said before, these program coordinators and program managers that we have at the various ICCAE institutions play a very integral role as far as making sure that these grants are administered. A lot of them take care of the paperwork. They are engaging with the students and answering questions, really helping to promulgate the program on the respective campuses. I know we do have a few individuals who are program coordinators and program managers who are back at their respective institutions right now who are streaming, who didn't have an opportunity to come. So this is going to be a very beneficial panel discussion. So what I'm going to do is just open up with the first question. What advice would you give to a newly established program? In other words, if I knew then what I know now, what would it look like? And we're not going to go down the entire line, but just give each a couple different people an opportunity to respond. Who wants to take the first?
Thank you, Clary. And as long as you don't say Mr. Cadaver, I'm okay. We're very much helpful. So I've gotten that before, so thank you, Clary. Advice, I mean, something was touched upon earlier, and I would say transparency and openness. Talked about the sensitivities within some departments and at some institutions. And at our program and with our consortium, we strive for that in terms of making sure to build trust with the community, academic-wise, and also our surrounding community. So to give you an example of that, right, we partner with departments that may be skeptical with our program or with our mission or the scope, right? Another example of how we build trust is with our students' families. To give you an example, we coordinate an induction ceremony for every new cohort that we induct into our program. And it's an evening celebration. I think Noemi's attended a couple times, and some of the other program managers from the PMO have attended. And it's an opportunity for the families to have buy-in, to understand what their sons and daughters are pursuing in terms of a career track. And it's also to demystify the community, the intelligence community. Our students are first-generation students coming mostly from Latin America and from nations that have had issues, obviously, with authoritarian regimes and where security services played a major role in their immigrating to the United States. So that's an example where I think openness and transparency in what we're seeking to do is very important.
At the Kansas Consortium, we are newly funded. We were just funded in 2017, so I can't speak a whole lot about what we do with student management quite yet. We're only in our second semester with students. I will say be prepared. We went from 19 students to 71 overnight, it seemed like, for our second semester, so student management will be an issue. The piece of advice that I would give is that when you're building your consortium relationships with your other colleges, to go deep in building those relationships, not just with the PIs and the faculty, but I have found that it's vital to get the financial aid people in the room, the registrars, and the budget directors. And in Kansas, we have a cultural divide, east versus west. KU is on the east side, so we really wanted to be culturally sensitive and not say, hey, here's the big university and this is how we're going to run this really great program and you're going to love it. So we got everyone involved in the design of the program, and it has helped immensely. Those of us who work with students know there's never a shortage of curveballs that students will give you when they're enrolling, and so it's just been really great to have the financial aid director at Seward County Community College know the financial aid people at KU, and that we can work out these issues on a per student basis.
Sure, please.
So I'm just going to piggyback real quick off of that. I just came to the Institute a little under 2 years. So this is my first go with the ICCAE and the consortium. And what I did was I individually met with each consortium schools, grant administrators and grant managers, because they all have different processes than we do. We have the good opportunity that Miami-Dade College actually uses the same financial system, so their policies and their procedures to do travel, to do purchasing, mimics ours, but FMU, Florida Memorial University, and Broward College do not. So I individually went to each of these schools and I met with their financial people, which helped greatly not have me understand their processes, but they understand ours.
For UTEP, one of the things that I wish I would have known before is to reach out to students a lot earlier. For the most part, we see our students when they're juniors or seniors, and by then they've already taken their language courses. But I've learned that by reaching to them when they're freshmen or even in high school, we're able to better educate them as to, we focus a lot on strategic languages. So we live in El Paso. 84% of the students that come to UTEP live in this county. So Spanish, they're very familiar with it. So we encourage them to take another strategic language, Farsi, Mandarin, Russian, Arabic, so that it makes their experience a little bit stronger. And it, of course, creates their networking skills with the community and stuff.
So one of the things that Hector mentioned at the very beginning was demystifying the intelligence community. And I know each of our campuses are different as far as ethnic makeups or those types of dynamics. Some are predominantly black institutions, HBCUs, HSIs, or whatever the case may be. If you could just talk a little bit more about your induction ceremony, and because I know that all the schools don't necessarily do one of those, and I think it could be really beneficial as far as infiltrating some of these demographics that we're having an issue trying to get into.
Sure thing. So, as we mentioned earlier, we have our larger certificate program for both graduate and undergraduate students, and that's part of our original ICCAE brand legacy, if you will. But the last several years, we pivoted to this idea of a workforce development program made up of the 4 pillars, right? Academics, mentorship, research, and professional development. And it's essentially a closed cohort program. The students that come in are in for a full year, and they take their academics together, they do the professional development together, they undertake a Washington, D.C. trip during spring break where we'll visit the agencies. They'll present their research at the agencies, or at FIU has an office or a center near the Capitol, so we have a venue there where students can present. And like I said, this is part of the year-long program. But to kick that off, we started in the summer term, so we moved our calendar up to match with agency internship cycles, if you will, right? So our classes are brought on board or onboarded summer term around June timeframe. They take their first 2 classes, and then by the time fall runs around, which is the start of the normal academic year, if you will, for all students, we have our induction ceremony. So we have an orientation in the summer, which is just for the students. Meet your instructors, meet the mentors you're going to be assigned in the program, meet the staff of the institute, which to a degree they've already met through the panel interview process we go through. But the induction ceremony is for them to come to attend with their loved ones, so their family members, their significant other, their parents, their grandparents. So we bring 2 or 3 family members and sit in through this process where you're going to be formally pinned, if you will, to join the program. We provide them with some trinkets, right? Each student receives an FIU Intelligence Fellowship polo shirt. Each student receives a branded FIU ICCAE journal. But part of that too is that we have keynote speakers. So for example, we had Admiral Studeman, the J2 at Southern Command, gave the keynote address. Noemi participated, and she also participated, gave that type of a keynote speaking role. And the idea here is not just for the students, it also kind of baptizes them into the journey that they're going to undertake, but it also for the families to pose any questions to the network. So we precede the induction ceremony with a short cocktail hour, but the whole intent of the program is to explain the programs more to their loved ones and to understand this is what your child is trying to pursue, and here's how we're going to get them there. And we found that that's very successful in terms of you see that students are not so hesitant to leave home for an internship or to be mobile for careers outside of the South Florida area, which again, the intent is most of these careers will be out of the South Florida area.
Awesome, thank you. Leslie and Carmen actually touched on this briefly during their remarks. Just talking about the partnerships that you've established within your college that have been very beneficial to help make your program successful.
When we first started, we were informed by someone in an office higher than ours that at CAE the best approach is to design the program and then tell the registrar then what you want to do. So we spent probably 6 weeks, 2 months designing the program, how the consortium students were going to get in, all of that. We were ready to go. It looked awesome. It was going to run smoothly. I took it to the registrar. She shot it out of the air within 5 minutes. And it's because she pointed out the Kansas Board of Regents will never go for this, and she was 100% right. So it turns out we had bad advice. Fortunately, she's a systems thinker because she's a registrar, but at the same time, pretty creative thinker. Once we had her on board to help us design the program, it went a lot better. So my advice would be, as soon as you get your grant, call the registrar to start setting it up.
For our program, it's been mainly working with other departments on campus. You know, of course, we have to work with our research and sponsored projects. We do a lot of study abroad, so we have to learn all the policies when it comes to travel for students, student safety, ensuring that all their documentation is in place. We've also worked with, because we do focus on language a lot, languages and linguistics in our office, to kind of collaborate in creating new courses such as Farsi. This is the second year that we offer it, and it's been growing and growing more, but it's been also, like she mentioned, working together, going through the registrar's office to make sure that our courses are going to be approved and making sure that students can enroll properly.
I could quickly excuse me, add to that. I'll let Patty speak too in terms of working with the Office of Sponsored Research, but in terms for us and the academic side, just identifying certain centers. For example, we have a really renowned Latin American and Caribbean center, so working with that center, the Asian Institute Center, Muslim Studies Institute, so all the different centers and institutes within our school, again, because we are the hub for national security and intelligence on campus, but they're the area studies hub, so we have collaboration or joint programming. An important office, and it was mentioned earlier with the presentation on Boring, the Office of Study Abroad, right? We have requirements to help students attain these opportunities, and we partner with the Office of Study Abroad to have sessions to not only introduce students to Boring, but other avenues or other sources of funding. And then naturally, some of our feeders into our program, the Honors College. The Honors College is a wonderful partner for our program, where many of our fellows come from, Hannah being a case in point, College of Business, College of Engineering as well. So, I mean, at the top, right, administrative buy-in, we're lucky that our dean, who's the founding dean of our school, was the original source of the grant, if you will, our original grant. But again, our provost, our president are very much involved with our program, and we have that type of buy-in. So in terms of those departments, I would say it's critical to have that collaboration.
Apparently Hector's already said it, so we'll just go.
One of the things that we notice as program managers when we come out to the different schools is that sometimes there is a perceived disconnect between you all, the PIs, you all, the program coordinators, and the Office of Sponsored Research. You all are doing what you're supposed to do as far as submitting your invoices, getting your paperwork into them. What are some challenges that you've seen as far as that synergistic relationship between what you're doing and the Office of Sponsored Research, and how are you navigating some of those relationships to overcome those challenges?
So I've been with the university now for 13 years, and before coming to the Institute for Public Policy, I was actually at the College of Engineering, and I worked very closely with the Office of Sponsored Research because we had many grants. My challenge that I face all the time now is, because we are under the School of International Public Affairs, we've sort of added a layer. When I was at engineering, we kind of worked directly with the Office of Sponsored Research. Our school doesn't have a lot of guidance on grants, so I'm able to somewhat bypass that. Unfortunately, our Office of Sponsored Research, because we are a fairly large university in South Florida, man hours, getting paperwork through, contacting people are not there, they're not answering emails. It's just, that's been my challenge for the past probably about 6 months now. For our consortium, we have to put sub-awards together and they have to be reviewed, and I've been having a big challenge trying to get that paperwork back and forth between the consortium schools and ourselves. I try to interject and say, listen, this is coming, be on the lookout, but that's probably been my big thing, is just getting feedback from our sponsored research office.
Carmen?
For our office and research and sponsored projects, we actually work very well together. They developed a new system called Project Information Center. So it's all the grants, and they go through our specific research administrators. So what we have to do for every transaction, everything that happens once a week, we're able to log into the system and certify all the transactions that happened. Anything that is incorrect, we can red flag it, and they'll question it. They'll go back and review it. This helps when it comes to invoices because it avoids delays on our end, and everything's up to date weekly. Once we certify, then of course the PI will go in again and review it and certify, and it goes forward. So that's kind of a system that's been working for us, and it's been helping us. If there's an error or something, we'll catch it right away. If there's a discrepancy, on somewhere, we'll catch it right away. Sometimes, because the numbers, we actually type them in, so that it's like double checking.
I just want to say something really quick. I don't want to throw our entire Department of Sponsored Research under the bus. Our pre-award is extremely backlogged. Our post-award is definitely spot on. I work with her multiple times a day, and she responds to me very quickly. She's only been with the Office of Sponsored Research, I would say, for about 6 months. She's been with the university many years, but she and I have a much better relationship than my post-award, than my pre-award contact.
As with anything, we've learned that communication and forcing everybody into a room to sit down on a regular basis to hash things out has worked best for us. These are complicated grants in some ways, especially with the sub-recipient awards to them. So when we first started, we met every 2 weeks with that department. And they would repeatedly tell us this is very unusual. We usually don't meet with PIs this often, and fortunately our PIs pushed forward, and they knew that this was going to be needed. So it has just become habit now, and I highly recommend it. A lot of times those meetings now, I'm the only one from our department who attends. But every once in a while we need a little extra muscle, and so the PIs will come and sit in on that meeting to get some things flowing. So. Yeah.
So that communication is definitely key in building those partnerships and relationships. The next question I have is, what type of student support have you found to be critical on your various campuses?
Thank you. Student support, many. For example, the research component. As I said, our program has those 4 pillars, and research is a big point in that. So we look for customers that our students would create products for. So our students are currently working on projects for CAE. We're one of the few CAE signature school programs. So through that effort, we initiated something new called we've called IFREME, so the Intelligence Fellowship Research and Mentorship Initiative. So 8 of our fellows, or 6 of our fellows, are working with our internal mentors. So again, our former or current practitioners would also have its second-tier mentors from CAE to work on their research projects. So that support is important. The students mentioned that putting them in those practical, in that environment is extremely important for their professional development. bridging the creating a bridge to the workforce. So I know all of our programs bring agencies to campus to do information sessions, but we go beyond that into, again, have the information sessions for our broad program, right? Our students who are in the certificate at large that are interested in national security and intelligence curriculum. But for our fellows, we have what we call professional consultations, which is one-on-one consultations. We ask the folks that come in from directorates of analysis or what have you to sit with their students to go over their research or to do to really break down their resume or their personal statements. So that type of consultation has been very valuable. That has led them to do well in interviews, and when we travel to Washington for our professional development trip, their students are also doing second or third level interviews and walking away with the COEs. That was one of the neat things of last year's trip. After we visited NGA, 2 students, as the rest of the group was doing our sessions, 2 or 3 students were being pulled out to finish their interviews, and at the end of the trip, they were informed that they received a COE. Also, like the previous panel talked about local assets, working with Southcom, the field offices for FBI, DHS. We have a stronger relationship with diplomatic security, the Bureau of Diplomatic Security. So we have our students in those spots as well to meet with those folks. And then mentorship. Our component of mentorship is extremely important because we know they're going to get the classroom application, right? They have their prescribed curriculum, their courses that they take. In analytic writing, structured analysis, and the others we covered this morning. But the idea of having a senior who was 30 years in the community, a senior executive, a former national intelligence officer for Latin America, as our senior mentor, Dr. Brian Littell, who was many years in CIA, or Ms. Yvette Cooley, who was with DIA, those folks provide an amazing amount of information in terms of community cultures and agency subcultures. So our students really walk in meeting with recruiters, truly having an understanding of the agencies. And then professional support. As our students work with their mentors and the faculty to apply for jobs, for hiring events, or vacancy announcements, we have a series of mock interviews, murder boards, but then providing that institutional support to help pay their travel costs to, as far as Honolulu, Hawaii, when we sent a couple of students years back, and all across the country where they're hiring events. So I would say that that type of critical student support is proven successful, and our students reaching their final goal.
We have very similar, like he was mentioning, we also put a lot of workshops together. We try to also develop structured analytical training over the summer. We put about a 2-week course for our students to attend. They're able to participate in that, but the majority of it is workshops. We have a student organization, and the student organization works with our program to bring in guest speakers from different agencies, whether they're local or outside agencies that come and visit. We also put the one-on-ones so our students can engage with these agencies, and they review their resumes, ask those questions that they've been wondering, and but most important is I think the analytical training that our program puts together for them and the opportunities that it creates for them.
And I would just add, for instance, one of the things we do, Brian mentioned, we just recently had an event with a senior analyst for the Korea Mission Center at CIA. So we had a general event for our general program, and then what we call practitioner roundtables, where it's exclusive to our fellows. And again, now you're talking about tradecraft, you're talking about the day in the life, you're talking about specific one-on-one engagement with our students. So that's another forum. And then our national security workshops, where they're meant to bring in agency representatives to do simulations and experiential exercises to help us with that question of recruitment, right? When we promote our national security workshops, our fellows are front and center with their FIU Intelligence Fellowship polos, but the idea is that they serve as ambassadors that help with that positive loop for recruitment as other students are being drawn to a national security workshop, a simulation exercise, and now they learn of this specialized cohort or this specialized group that has, they're all pursuing the same goal. So that's really been helpful.
We're too new, I'm not gonna.
No, that's totally fine. With the last few minutes that we have for this particular panel discussion, do we have any questions from our audience?
Leslie, I'm really asking you, I guess, because you kept mentioning the registrar. Yes. And just curious, I mean, you mentioned financial aids also, so I assume some of your stipends or scholarships run through financial aid. But tell me more on what you were talking about with the registrar. Well, I understand what a registrar does.
Yeah.
I'm just curious why you mentioned.
So the consortium involves the University of Kansas, Donnelly College, which is a small Catholic school in urban Kansas City, and then we have two community colleges, Dodge City Community College and Seward County out in western Kansas. And it was really important for us to be able to deliver those courses to those students, recognizing that a student chooses to go to community college, usually because tuition is so much more affordable than it is if they come straight to KU. So we wanted to deliver a mechanism to where those students could pay, you know, their community college tuition and take the classes. That's where we got in trouble with the Board of Regents, because they said, why should a KU student pay more money for this class? So then we had to get creative. We came up with some tuition waivers, things like that. The consortium students, for instance, have to apply and become non-degree seeking students in the KU system to be able to access the online courses, that sort of thing. So could not have done that without the registrar at the table.
I'm just going to add to that real quick. Last year, for the summer, we worked with our consortium for the first year, and 2 students from each of the consortium schools joined FIU, and they went as a consortium to a study abroad. So I believe, so all 3 of our consortium schools signed up as non-degree seeking students, and some of them will eventually be transferring into FIU as full-time students, but we also had to work with the registrar's office in getting them on board so that they could all travel together.
Do we have any other questions?
And I would say in terms of also cooperation or collaboration, right now, as we said, we're experiencing our growing pains with our curriculum or cross-referencing our curriculum. But for instance, as Patty mentioned, the study abroad, the national security workshops I referenced, those are open to all our consortium members. Proximity does help. We're all within 30 minutes driving distance from each other, 30, 45 minutes. But Miami traffic will make it 2 hours if you don't watch out. But and also the DC trip. So our consortium partners will be represented in our DC trip. We have 2 students from each consortium institution who will join us for our week-long trip. And what we learned is that those students have joined the respective ICCA club over at MDC. They're part of Jared's program at FMU, and they will be transitioning to FIU within the next academic year. So it's another way of developing a feeder pool into our fellowship program.
Well, as we wrap up this particular session, I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of the... Oh, we have one more question right back here.
Well, it just occurred to me, maybe this is the session to ask, about the summer internships, or I'm not using the right term, the 2 sessions.
Summer seminar.
Seminars, yeah. I don't know if it's appropriate, I can ask you offline, Clary, but...
Go ahead and ask.
Yeah, well, I guess I was just curious what experiences the students feel like they had at those, and, you know, from the program managers, they sound very beneficial, and we've got many students that already want to sign up, so it's going to be hard to...
So we always ask as a program management office that you all, as the principal investigators, identify your best and your brightest to send to us. And I know that you all have different processes that you go through in identifying who those individuals are. So does that kind of go into your question, how they each are involved in the process or how they decide who's going to come?
There's been so much discussion about different trips to DC and internships and so on. The seminars are completely different and so on, and I realize that. I was just curious if the program managers or anyone else had any lessons learned about not the benefit, but, you know, what are those 2 summer seminars like versus some of the other activities that have gone on within the CAE schools. And I don't think I'm asking the question very well, but I assume a trip to DC, Hector, for your students is like a 2 or 3 day trip.
So under our program, it's a full week. So we arrive and we're literally there Sunday to Saturday or Sunday to Friday. So we visit about 8 agencies and also think tanks and things of that nature, and have wargaming exercises, for example, things of that nature. As part of the summer seminar for the program office is phenomenal. I mean, I can't stress enough how you must take that opportunity and refer 2 of your top talent to that program. It complements our trip. Usually, our trip is usually a spring break time, so now in March, and then what we'll see is that our students will return for the summer seminar, and again, it's a longer period of time. They're able to do further workshops, they do structured analysis, there is a career fair type of event where, again, it gets them to build that network and build that bridge directly with the community, with recruiters, and we've heard nothing but positive things from our students for the summer seminars.
So I'm sure I can speak on behalf of the principal investigators in the ICCAE Program Management Office when I say that you all play a very, very critical role. You all are typically the ones who are reaching out to us as program managers to say, hey, we're doing this particular event, we need speakers, or we're coming up to Washington, D.C. You all are taking care of the coordination, those efforts. So on behalf of the Program Management Office and all the PIs, can we all just take a moment to give you all a round of applause? So as they return to their seats, I'm going to introduce, have Ms. Pizarro Jaime come back up to the podium. She's going to facilitate the next portion of our discussion so that you all have the opportunity to engage with our senior advisory board members. Noemi?
Okay, so we are going to be using this time in a very effective way. It is my understanding that when we left to meet with the senior advisory board, there were some lingering questions, right, from the principal investigators. So we wanted to use this time to give you the opportunity to ask questions. One of the things that I ask is that you be succinct in the questions that you may ask, so that we can, in the room, right, with the senior advisory board members, can respond to those. So who will be the first person to ask the question? That hot question that you had right before we left for the senior advisory board. Who was the hottest one in the room? You can all tell.
One left already.
God dog it. Okay, who else? So does any of the SAP members want to address some of the issues, the questions that someone who have left the room may have had?
Hi, of course I have, and it's something I want to address. So earlier this year, and this is one of the SAB meeting agendas we go over the calendar of events that Noemi's team puts together. And I'm going to tell you the importance of this calendar of events. The calendar of events has all of your colloquiums, your career fairs, all of your activities. So our office got a call from the PDD&I's office. She wanted to know what school events in ICCAE should she attend. I think 4 schools had responded to Noemi's call for events. So 4 schools made it on the PDD&I's list. When you are not responsive to Noemi for her call for a schedule of events and what's going on, the D&I and the PDD&I will not see it. Noemi and her team is your link to the D&I's office. So I think a lot of you, I sound horrible, I think a lot of you missed a great opportunity in not being responsive to Noemi's team. And it was rather disappointing. And I would tell you a couple of times the PDD&I's office would call and say, really? Is that it? How many schools participate? Well, there are over 60 schools participating. How many schools provided the information that Noemi requested regarding colloquiums, career fairs, speaker series? I think it was 4, maybe 5. When you're not responsive to Noemi, the D&I's office can't be responsive to you. So when we talk about this partnership in terms of providing information, if you don't provide it, there's nothing we can do for you. So, off my bandwagon. Thank you.
Okay, who else in the room? This is your opportunity. Remember, we are a team, and we rise together or we fall together. Yes, Jack.
Jeff Carnes, CAE again. I want to share what the one PI asked as she left for the airport. It was a follow-on from yesterday's discussion of what we're looking for and a bit about the security process. And this is something that we discussed at the SAB that we will be trying to work through, and then you guys will find out and come up with ideas. We talked about the difficulty communicating with your students if they apply to some of the agencies and certain jobs, very briefly. And I think a few people, their questions showed that there was concern over this. So I just want to get out there so you understand what you're facing and that you're comfortable with it. There are positions, obviously, in the IC where the person's going to enter into service where their identity and connection to an agency has to be protected undercover. We tell all of our applicants, even overt, that they should not share the fact they're applying to our agency in particular, and I think some of the other agencies for some jobs, and they can speak up, will have some similar things. They should not tell anyone outside of their spouse, their parents, who maybe they're going to get some mail at their house or something like that, because they may be limiting their future assignment opportunities with the government. So you're going to have students that have been perhaps to an interview and they've been told that they should not discuss their pending application with an agency, with anyone, except for maybe a small list of people. And my personal experience is some of these students, if they're sitting in a group discussion and they're talking to those that are applying for covert positions, the other students will get nervous and think that, I'm going to play it safe. I'm not telling them I'm applying to be an overt analyst with an agency. So, we're going to be torn here because there's a very real problem we have to deal with protecting these future officers' identities, to protect their life and to protect the lives of those that work for our government that are committed overseas assets. So you're going to run into that. All I can say is that we're going to talk about are the ways that we can help bridge this gap of you knowing who's applying, us knowing for the purpose of informing Congress so that they can be satisfied with the outcomes of these programs. We have to figure things out, but you have to understand and respect that there will be students who aren't going to want to talk with you about that. I would argue that in past relationships with one program in the 2009-14 cohort, the PI came from the government background, knew things, and we talked about this, and I thought that one thing that he did particularly well was to build rapport with the students, and he was part of the education that we talked about. What are you getting into? What's your security process going to be like? He would tell them that if you're going to apply for a covert position or an agency tells you that you should not share that you're applying, you don't need to tell me, don't tell me. But if you could tell me you simply have applied for some positions, just do that. I will know that I'm not going to put that in writing and send it to people, but I will put it in my metrics that was then submitted every quarter that X number of students had applied. And then he often was told, hey, I got an offer from an organization. Great. He put it in his numbers, no names. The identity is protected. There's no digital dust. And yet we can get metrics. So we're going to have to talk through how do we figure ways to do that. But just understand that you guys are in an odd position. The students, I would argue, are in the worst position because they're very nervous. Rightly so. They're in this position of being told to be discreet about what they're doing. So that is the reality of what happens. I would like if any of my colleagues from other agencies have similar circumstances in how they tell their applicants to treat their relationship. It might be helpful, but at a minimum, we're one of the biggest hirers. Our agency does that. And that's, if you have further questions, I'd be happy to talk to you offline.
Just stand by until the microphone gets to you. Thank you.
I have a sort of related question, and that is about, we have this cohort of scholars. So we have been very careful about posting their pictures on our ICCAE website. We have not. Is that a good practice? And that's what we should be doing, is not posting. Thank you.
Anything that minimizes the chances someday some foreign intelligence service that surely someone done it. Start trying to search for anything on ICCAE programs. I'm sorry, I got a loud voice now. But anyway, I think that's a great practice because what we're looking at is we have to be very honest. Foreign intelligence services, this is not hard for them. This is really easy. To know that they should every once in a while run searches on ICCAE
see if they can get rosters. That makes their job so much easier. They got to look at, you know, how many students are in this program nationally right now? Maybe a couple thousand. If they just got to look at a couple of thousand targets, that's so much better than looking at all the students across the country. So I think that's a great practice. Just remember that. I also think from what we are being taught and told by our lawyers about PII, that you're also making a smart move. You know, I don't know if you guys get permission before you do these things from the student, but it's getting really restrictive to the benefit of the individual for the protection and security.
Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Kurt Zurcher. I'm with the National Security Agency, and definitely not dissenting from what Jeff said. You always want to err on the side of caution, which is why that's, you know, protect people's identities and personal identifiable information. But NSA is an agency. If we give somebody a conditional job offer, we don't put restrictions on that. We say use common sense, don't put it on Facebook, use discretion, but let your parents know. Let your other fellow students know, because then they know that, wow, you know, colleagues have gotten through the program, right? And definitely let your PIs know, because they help you get there. So if they apply to multiple agencies, then, you know, use caution, discretion. But for speaking only for NSA, we don't ask people not to share that information.
Dale, would you like to address at least the point from NGA's perspective?
So good afternoon, everyone. From an NGA perspective, we fall in line pretty much with NSA in regards to you want to let your family know, and in the agency that's witting, you have, so your family's witting of what you're doing. You don't want to make it a policy to go out and tell everyone I'm a geospatial analyst watching Russia. You know, we wouldn't do that, right? That's just not good OPSEC common sense. Later, when they are members of the intelligence community, unless they are in a covert position, they're not allowed to hide their association now either. And that's covered by federal law. So once you're in, it's a little bit different. So discretion is the word, and common sense and good OPSEC. So about the photos, I'm encouraged to hear that, because at least we're thinking through that a little bit. And the social media is a real easy win for the adversary, because you're taking a target footprint of tens of thousands down to a very finite group, and that makes their job real easy. And they're in the universities too. Mm-hmm. So if they can get that list and they're here, that's an easy job. So discretion is the word of the day.
There's another question here.
So related to that, it's beneficial for all of our programs and for the ICCAE program as a whole for us to be showing our accomplishments. You'll have your newsletter, universities are featured. What kind of guidelines can you give for discretion in featuring our student accomplishments?
So I will tell you what we have known and what the past practices have been, right? So normally what we have is your organization's name.
Oh, University of Texas at San Antonio.
No, I'm sorry. I know, yeah, but if you something, it's okay, I got you. I understood what you meant. That's a wonderful question. What we do is we feature the information you provided, right? Some of you submit pictures. If we have space, you know, we include the picture you provided, but remember, you're the person sending that to, in this case, Lisa. Thus far, that I know of, not an incident has occurred from providing that type of information. Now, that is something that moving forward, we may, you know, discuss further down the road, because the threats are real, and because technology is, you know, becoming pretty fancy. From my perspective, it really doesn't matter that you call me Sasha Fierce. You know, someone right with the technology may recognize me. But right now, then that is the point that moving forward, we will think about it, right? Just to give further guidance and make sure that everyone is protected. This issue comes up every single time we meet, you know? And I think that we sort of go over it at the 4-digit grade coordinate for those of you who are military, you know, but what it means is that we discuss it at the very high level, but in reality we really need to attend to this. So I see some heads assenting in the room, and we'll take care of that. Lisa, okay.
Okay. I've said this before. I just retired last year from the FBI. I worked counterintelligence the last 7 years of my career. I can assure all of you that your programs have already been spotted and assessed by foreign intelligence services. And they will take a long-term view on this, knowing that it's students. If they've got their identities, they'll track them. Okay? The study abroad programs are totally targeted. Okay? So my recommendation is that you need to know who has access to your student lists who are part of this program. Assuming most universities have shared drives where pretty much everybody and their brother has access to it, you might want to think about tightening that up. There's no way to make perfect security out of this, but I'm telling you it's happening all day, every day. I worked with every university that was in our AOR out of Kansas City, which, you know, probably a dozen at least that we dealt with these issues with constantly. Okay? Now I'm teaching at CAE, so they're going to get to hear me all the time. But this is happening, and you need to take it seriously because, as our CIA gentleman said, if you get somebody who's hired by them, that identity has to stay secret because that person will be in jeopardy the second they travel.
Thank you. Any other questions? There's a question back here.
Yeah, I want to comment a little bit on, kind of as an outsider. So I'm the co-PI on this at NC State, and this is the first one of these that I've been to, though, because my colleague has really headed up most of this. And this conversation in particular strikes me as, so I study institutions, right, as a political scientist. There are all sorts of mixed messages happening that have been happening in this conversation, let's say, throughout the day. On one hand, we're talking about pinning ceremonies and T-shirts and promotion and recruit, right, in a very pipeline-oriented, you know, get them in high school, attach them to a pipeline, run them through into the intelligence community. In other words, identify them as early and as visibly as possible, right? And then on the other side, sort of the people in the agencies now going, yeah, but I don't know if this is a great idea, right? This presents all sorts of sort of compromising opportunities. And so I don't know what the answer to this is at all, but it seems to me two very different mandates that are coming down, I presume, from that end of it, right? And on one hand, it's the sort of program managers whose job is to bring programs in, get numbers in, justify it to Congress and all of that, right? And that message gets sent down, but on the operational side, it's something very different. So this seems to me like a really, really important conflict that is inherent in the way that the program is set up.
So if we have a conflict, the conflict must be resolved. Just give me a moment. Must be resolved. This is an issue that, again, I agree with you, has been talked about before. And so what happens is that we have overseers and then we have overseers, right? And everybody wants a piece of me, right? I mean, and when I say me, I mean the program, right? So it's like, okay, and this is our statement of facts. Okay, so what are you doing, principal investigators, to market the program, right? So how do you do that in a safe environment? Okay, because they ask it. They ask me all the time. What are the PIs? What are you doing to market the program? Okay, how many individuals are going through the program, right? Those are real numbers. Now, do I need the names, the phone numbers, the PII data that I'm not supposed to have? No, we're looking for raw numbers, right? If someone wants to find you, they'll find you, to his point, right? So there are a lot of things that we need to address from the intelligence community side of the house and really come up with the strategy to say, this is what we can do, this is the way we can protect the program, right? And still acquire the information that we need to acquire. Do I have all the answers like you? I do not, right? But I will definitely do my best to work in tandem with others. Last thing before Linda takes the mic. When the times that I have gone up to the Hill, right? One of the things that they are always asking, so how many individuals were hired into the IC? That's their main question. And when I cannot answer that question, then my head goes on the chopping block, right? Because I'm supposed to know. And I have been to other meetings, right? The last one was with San Antonio. And one of the partners says, okay, so how many people have you hired? So this is a real struggle, right, internal to our organizations that we need to address. Again, not an excuse, a statement of fact. This program has been around. It has, you know, for a little bit. I think this year is going to be 15 years. And he's still a teenager. So consequently, the executive part of the brain has not been completely developed. Linda.
No, that was really well said, Noemi. I was going to compare what we're trying to do in the IC with what Department of Defense has done. So the reason why we're trying to build a pipeline is because the intelligence community was built in secrecy on the backs of white males. Late 40s, early 50s, when it came time to open up and try to improve our analysis and look more like the rest of the United States, we looked around and said, how come we don't look like that? Oh, I know. We're a very well-kept secret. And we hired people who look like us. So we tended to look like your average white male. Department of Defense, on the other hand, everybody knows what Department of Defense is. They have a little ditty, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, whatever. It's not just a job, it's an experience. The IC really relies now on the IC-CAE program to build this pipeline. But similar to DoD, you don't know who the SEALs are or the Special Forces are, but you might know they're part of this larger community. So very much to what Noemi is saying, and also Jeff, trying to build a pipeline of people who are familiar with the intelligence community, somebody who wants to serve the country but not necessarily wants to wear the uniform, must know that we exist and who we are and that there's a mission that they can fulfill. It does not mean that some people are going to become our special forces and our SEALs who are going to be targeted in a completely different way. So it sounds like a dichotomy, it sounds like it's at odds, but in a way it's the nature of national security. And as we've suggested here, we understand we need to change the way we message and our way going forward. There's a lot that has happened in cybersecurity and technology now, where after 15 years, you know, we might need to give it a little booster shot. But we'll be doing that. But I don't want you to think that it is completely at odds. We still need to do that outreach. People still need to know that we exist, but they don't necessarily need to know exactly who our special forces are. So that's all I got.
Thanks. The woman who was sitting next to Dale asked a question about documenting successes, and I think you got off on another point, and I was wondering if you could come back to that and sort of address how all of the research and the projects that are being worked on can be communicated across the IC so that the successes and the impact of the work that's being done is distributed but not compromised by putting out to.
So actually, you were, remind me of your name. I know your last name, but I can't remember your first name. Lisa. Lisa? Yes, ma'am. Okay, Lisa, second power. So you were asking specifically about, was it the IC-CAE newsletter?
Generally, whenever
overall?
Overall, like.
Okay, can we give her a mic, please?
Lisa.
Sorry, didn't communicate too clearly my first question. We're meeting generally whenever we're trying to toot our own horn, promote our program on our university website, our programs page. You know, we had been thinking about having a page for every student to show what kinds of research projects they're doing in class and in their research studies. Whenever the college on their social media platform wants to say, hey, look, CTSB did a great thing, here's
here's the deal, here's the student spotlight.
I got you.
Yeah, how much do we need to rein that in?
I got it.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to answer that question from the program management's perspective, program management office perspective. I need to slow down my brain. But I will ask the principal investigators here who are seasoned, right? So Dr. Valero, Hector from FIU, Dr. Gilfeather, would you like to say something about that as well? You have a beautiful smile, and you're the oldest one in the room.
Something about being the dean of the program. I think that you should not have individual websites for individual students, so I will say that. What I think you should, we don't publish any names. If we have a photograph of an event, no names. Although we're going to rethink that because of facial recognition now. However, we usually use a very small photograph, so, but it's whatever the resolution of the photograph is. If you get a very low resolution photograph, you've got a 50-50 chance maybe. Moral of the story is no names. We do put a few research papers on our website, but these are students that we've told them what we're doing and asked them if they wanted to. And if they want it and they're going to Georgetown, they want to go to the State Department maybe, okay. But if they show an interest in the IC and that's where they want to go, we discourage it. So I would say the practice has been over the last 10 years, and Larry's been here 15 years, so he can speak even to it longer, is no names, photographs, no caption except a group of students. When you travel abroad, we travel as a university group. We do not have any affiliation with ICCAE. So, and actually even when we do anything in town. In fact, this is why, and I know we get in trouble because our program is not called ICCAE, and ICCAE wants us to keep branding it. Well, we do, carefully, but we always advertise as the National Security Studies Program. Now maybe that's a dead giveaway to a certain agency, but it shouldn't be because there's national security in many, many places, many, many universities. But I really think the branding needs to be thought about as well. Larry, you want to say a word?
I just wanted to add really quickly to say that we practice similar offsite, right? In terms of our induction ceremony or our practitioner roundtables, those are closed events only to the students in our fellowship program. Students who are our fellows are also part of the OAS or State Department Diplo hack this week, and they've won the first prize. So they're not identified as ICCAE students. We never publish pictures, we never print out names. So in that regard, is something that we passed on to our consortium members. But we in terms of reporting who has been hired, as I mentioned, we have mentors. Then Brian is the co-PI or the main PI. If anybody knows, it will only be Brian really and those mentors. There's no discussion amongst the staff, Patty, myself, or others of who is really getting placed. Just today, this week I learned that Hannah ended at CAE, for example. So, and when we visit Washington, again, we tell the students to have that OPSEC that you're visiting there as a university or as we're studying abroad, not to mention the true intention of our visit.
Thank you, Hector.
Thank you.
I'll be very quick about it. The ideas that Frank and Hector brought up are the way these legacy programs generally practice. I think we have to be careful, though, I think there's also taking this a bit too far in some cases. I'm just being devil's advocate here because we do have a possibility of stifling our programs if we don't promote them well on campus. We try to take the added precautions, and sometimes we mess up, and this conversation has generated in my mind a couple of circumstances where, just the other day we took a photograph. I forgot to tell my instructor. We had a guest speaker here. They took a photograph of a very large class, it was a research seminar from
forward, you could see everybody's faces. It happens. Mistakes do happen. We do use students' names though, but we tend, when not to use them in close-ups and under certain circumstances. When they travel abroad, we're always cautious to tell them, to be careful. They're not to identify themselves as being ICCAE. That's critical, and I think that's a really important point. But another thing I want everyone to be aware of is the cyber issues involved here. And at times we have had orientations. We haven't had them regularly in the last couple of years, but for every new cohort that's come in, we tell them, it's not so much that you're traveling or what, we have them talk with study abroad office. Sometimes we have them have FBI come in and give a talk about safety when they're traveling. But it's the cyber issues are the ones that they really have to be cautious of. Phishing schemes and the like, it happens a lot. So being plugged into your information security office on your particular campus is important. And the students should know that if they get suspicious email, that they should report that. Here in our program, they tend to know that they have to report it to ISO here locally and or the FBI if there's a problem. So I just want to bring those couple of issues up, and just know that there are no perfect answers in this situation. I can tell you this. I hate to say it, but we've had students who have gotten into the CIA, and guess what? They told me. They told the program.
They should overt legally.
Yeah. And then
I can tell you, here's what's happened. I just realized.
Jeff, I know. Just hear me out for a second, Jeff. Just hear me out. And in other positions as well, I tell them after we have this conversation, I don't want to talk to you again, right? And I'm very clear because I know who they're going to interview with, right? And then of course the agency tells them that, okay? But we do get good reporting, anecdotal reporting at least, from those who go on to work for your particular agency. And the way we do it, just like it's been mentioned, we anonymize it when we report. It's we say, hey, we have a student who has received a COE from this agency, right? And I have to assure students, because they are very cautious, but they do come to us. We also do listserv calls, for them to reach out to our office and let us know if they get a conditional offer of employment. Some reply, some don't. Others are so cautious that they will come into the office and tell me, okay? Or they will call on the telephone, right, rather than use email so they don't leave a trailing test or anything like that. But these are just some things that I've experienced through our ICCAE program.
Right. Jeff?
Yeah, let me make sure to clarify one thing. First of all, we love this program. CAE has been supporting it since it became we had a pilot. We had an officer with it in the pilot phase. And that continued a legacy of working in this program since then. We want your students. Our director of operations wants your students. They and the analytic director were the biggest ones that show up at the National Security Studies seminar in the summer. They're the most likely to come along when we set up visits to schools too, okay? So I'm just trying to, but we have a real issue, I just want to get it out there. The very fact we're coming to your campuses, obviously, we're willing to expose ourselves, and our Geo colleagues will too. They come under a single first name. We're doing this, so please don't take this as CAE is thinking about backing out. We're not, but we do need your help. And I want to give one example because I just realized it's happened from PIs, none are in this room because I was just thinking through the last couple of years. It's happened through people reaching out through the PMOs in the program. If you send a resume by email to me, and it turns out that person applied to the DO, we got a problem. Okay? It's not going to be the end for that person necessarily, but I can almost guarantee you at some point someone's going to run a search for affiliations when they make decisions about a career. And if it's an email, it's out there forever. That's the part of the problem we have. We'll be talking about we need help people understand. I would really like to advocate what you described, Larry. What I had been doing with Penn State in 09 to 14 was that people came to the PI personally. It was partly me talking to the students face to face when I was out there. And then John knowing that's the message he would convey. That you can come to me as a PI if you're applying to the intelligence community, but you have any concerns about, who you're applying to. And the PIs, when you know this, will know to protect their identity, and we'll tell them, hey, I got it, I know they're probably telling you not to tell me anymore or whatever, follow their rules, but thank you for sharing with me that you're interested in this agency, so you can at least kind of capture that this student is applying. That's great, and that helps, because then I would go see on my visits the PI. He'd tell me, I believe 2 or 3 of my students will be applying for a certain position. I'd take that stuff back in a written note, I'd go search and figure out if it's there, and then do what I could, which is one reason I'm here, is to then do what I could to make sure those applications got looked at in a different way, in case the person looking at it didn't know about the CAE program. So we are still trying to use this. I just want to get it out there, the fact that we do have real issues, and it affects your students' future. And it's a small set, okay? It is a small set of people. And like I said, the spillover is the overt hires sometimes get really nervous, like, well, I think I'm supposed to be able to tell people, but I'm not sure. And just know that may happen, so you just have to use kid gloves.
Okay, wonderful. I see you, Dr. Graves. I'm just being respectful of the time for our next speaker. Dr. McGee, is he here?
He's here. He's here.
Okay, so make your way over here, please. Thank you so very much. So.